Hello everyone and welcome to Learning DITA Live 2019. I'm Alan Pringle of Scriptorium and I will be moderating the first two sessions today. This session is Introduction to DITA and it is presented by my colleague Gretyl Kinsey. Learning DITA Live is brought to you by Scriptorium, the content strategy experts. Since 1997, Scriptorium has helped companies manage, structure, organize, and distribute content in an efficient way. If you are trying to figure out how the DITA model can best support your content, or you are setting up a DITA system, please contact us. We would love to work with you. LearningDITA.com and Learning DITA Live would not be possible without the help from our sponsors, and we thank them very much for their support. I want to tell you a little bit about how the session is going to work. Attendees are muted during the webcast. Even so, we still want your input during the session. Please type your questions and your comments at any time in the questions module, and our speaker will answer those questions at the end of the session. So if you would, please locate the questions module in the GoToWebinar interface now. At the beginning of the question and answer phase, please look for a link to a session evaluation survey in the questions module. We very much would appreciate your feedback on the sessions. And with that, I want to turn things over to Gretyl. Gretyl, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hello, everyone. All right, I want to welcome all of you to Introduction to DITA. This is a session that's designed for those of you who may be unfamiliar with DITA and want to learn more about it. It's going to be kind of a general overview that will cover the basics of what DITA is and how you can use it. So just a little about me. My name is Gretyl Kinsey. I'm a technical consultant with Scriptorium Publishing, and I've been with the company since 2011. And I specialize in content strategy and helping companies figure out the best solution for their content problems. And as part of that, I also work a lot in DITA tools and technologies. And I've written and contributed to multiple courses on learningdita.com and presented at last year's Learning DITA Live event as well. So let's just start our introduction to DITA with the basic question, what is DITA? DITA stands for Darwin Information Typing Architecture, and it's an open standard of XML that was originally created by IBM and donated to OASIS, which is the Organization for the Advancement of Structured Information Standards, in 2005. It is an XML-based, tool-independent way to create, organize, and manage content. And it's a way of creating structured topic-based content that exists separately from its formatting. So let's break down what all of that means, starting with the concept of structured authoring. So structured authoring is a workflow that lets you define and enforce consistent organization of information and documents. In an unstructured authoring environment, the hierarchy and organization of your content may be defined in something like a style guide, but there's no way to ensure that authors always follow it. Whereas in a structured authoring environment, such as DITA, the hierarchy and organization of your content is strictly defined and enforced by tags. So now let's talk a little bit about topic-based authoring. Topic-based authoring means creating content where one file or one unit contains information on a single topic, so that these topics can be assembled into documents for publication. And this is different from something like chapter-based or book-based authoring, where a single file may contain information covering multiple different topics. Topic-based authoring is inherent in the structure of DITA. And finally, let's just talk a little bit about what it means to separate content from its formatting. In something like a desktop publishing-based authoring environment or authoring tool, the formatting or the appearance of your content is tied to the content itself. Content is created so that what you see is what you get in the final output. But in DITA, you create the content and then the formatting is applied separately and automatically when the output is generated. So when you're writing that content in DITA, instead of what you see is what you get, what you see is only one option for how the final deliverable might look. So now that we've gone over what DITA is, let's talk about some of the reasons that you might want to use DITA and some of the benefits that it offers. The first one is flexibility. So because DITA is an open standard, that gives it a lot of flexibility. It can be used with a variety of different tools for authoring, editing, formatting, and storing content. And if your business goals or your content needs change, being in DITA makes it easier to go to a different tool set while keeping that same set of source content. Another benefit is semantic value. The structure of DITA gives your content semantic value. DITA is a markup language, so every piece of content is tagged, and semantic value means that the tag surrounding each piece of content has meaning. So your authoring and publishing tools know what kind of information is contained in each tag. Tagging your content so that it has semantic value helps with things like search and filtering. Another benefit is reuse. Topic-based content is easier to reuse than chapter or book-based content. And that's because individual topics can be used and reused in any order in a number of different documents. So in DITA, the topics are organized within maps, which are kind of analogous to something like a table of contents. In DITA, a map lets you specify the order and the hierarchy of the individual topics. A reusable topic addresses a single idea or question and contains enough information to stand on its own. It doesn't assume any context about what information comes before or after it, and it's contained in a single file so that you only have one topic per file. And finally, the last benefit we have here is multiple outputs from a single source. Separating content from formatting makes it easier to produce multiple output types. So if your organization needs to produce more than one type of output, for example, let's say you have PDF, HTML, and EPUB, using something like DITA allows you to apply different formatting to the same set of source files. And that means all of your outputs will be consistent with each other. If you're producing multiple output types, but you don't have that separation of content and formatting, that means that you're going to end up with a duplication of the content and you'll have to have it reformatted for each output type. And that involves a lot more time and effort and introduces a possibility for inconsistency and errors. I want to talk about another feature of DITA, which is specialization. The markup language of DITA includes a predefined set of elements, and you can use these elements as they are out of the box, but you can also specialize them for your particular content needs. Specialization is the process of creating new DITA elements or attributes based on the structure of the existing ones. So a few possibilities for specialization. Specialization lets an information architect create elements that fit your organization better than what might be provided by default in DITA. And this may include things like creating new elements to contain types of information that are not defined in DITA and give them semantic value, creating new names for elements that are more relevant to your authors, or creating new elements to contain certain information in a specific order. The kind of level or amount of specialization that you do is going to depend on your needs. You may be able to use most data elements as they are and only specialize maybe one or two, or you may need to specialize a lot of elements so that most or all of the elements you're using are specialized. I do want to issue one word of caution here, which is that specialization does add to the cost of a DITA implementation. So it's important to balance the value gained from specialization against the cost of implementing and maintaining specialization. I want to talk now about DITA topics. So a DITA topic is a building block of content. And one of the fundamental principles of DITA is that different types of content require different containers called topic types. And that way the elements in the topic can be specific to the information that's being described. The DITA standard includes different types of topics that are intended for different purposes. And those topic types contribute to the semantic value of your content. The topic type tells you what kind of information is contained inside that topic. Some of the most commonly used topic types are just the generic one called topic, and then also concept, task, reference, and glossary entry. So let's take a closer look at each of these different topic types. And we'll start with topic. So all DITA topic types are related to this generic or common topic type simply called topic. And this is meant to just cover a single idea. Some common elements that you will find within the structure of a topic are topic, title, and body. So here's just an example of a topic, and what we are seeing right here is we've got some basic content, and on the left it's presented in this very friendly sort of author-oriented view, and then on the right it's presented in the actual text or code view. And if you are using DITA and you're working in a DITA editor, this is typically the option you'll have to see your content in both of these views. So that's kind of what I've recreated here. So if we take a look at this, what we've got is first there's the topic element, and that's just a container to tell us that this is a topic. Then we have a title element, and that contains the title of this topic, which is wild duck species. And then finally, we've got the body element, and that contains all of the content within the body of this topic. So in this example, we've got our body element, and it contains a single paragraph of text. The generic topic type is used as the basis for all of the other DITA topic types. So it's specialized into a number of different topic types, each of which holds a specific type of information. And these specializations are contained by default in the DITA standard. Many of the elements in this generic topic type can also be used by the other topic types. And although you can use this generic topic type for authoring content, it's actually much better to use one of the more specific ones, such as concept, task, reference, or glossary entry. And that's just because they're going to have more semantic value than something generic like topic. So we're going to go over each of those different topic types next. And we'll start with concept. So a concept topic contains conceptual information, and it answers the question why. It provides background information about a subject that the reader needs to know. Concept topics usually contain paragraphs of text and lists, but they can also include things like notes, tables, and graphics that are needed to understand the ideas behind a particular subject. So some of the common elements that you might find in a concept topic. First, we've just got concept, and that's going to be that container element for the concept topic. Then you can also have, for your next one, title, con body. These are all the required basic elements that make up your concept. Within that con body, you can have things like P element, which is a paragraph. You can have note. You can also have UL, unordered list, and OL, ordered list. And you can have images and tables. So here's an example of a concept topic. And again, we see both the sort of author-friendly view versus text view. And this is actually the exact same information that we just saw in the generic topic type example a few minutes ago. But now that this is tagged as a concept topic, it's got a lot more semantic value because we can look at that concept tag that contains this topic and know that this is conceptual information. So next, let's talk about task topics. A task topic contains step-by-step procedural information and answers the question, how? So it's going to give you step-by-step instructions to complete a specific task. DITA also allows things like step results, graphics, and notes to supplement those instructions, and you're also allowed to have one level of sub-steps within a task. And if you are working with technical content, that does tend to be really heavy on task topics. There are two types of tasks that are offered in DITA, strict and general. The strict task requires all of the elements to appear in a specific order, and it's appropriate for items that require step-by-step instructions. Whereas the general task, which is also known as the loose task, allows more flexibility in the order of the elements and allows steps to contain much more varied content. So this is more appropriate for things like process overviews. And for our example, we're going to look at a strict task. So common elements that you will see in a strict task topic, you've got task, again, this is just the container element for the task topic, title, and task body. And then within the task body, you can have steps, which is the sequence of actions that your user should take, step, which will be each individual action within your set of steps. And then each step is required to contain a command element, which is just the specific action the user takes. So here's an example of a strict task in both the authoring and text view. And just like with our other topic examples, we have our container element, we've got a title, and we've got a body. And in this case, the container element is called task and the body element is called task body. And in this task, we have just one step, choose a location. So what we've got here in these tags, we have the steps element, which is a container for that entire set of steps. And then we've got the individual step element. And finally, within that, we've got our command element, which is actually what contains the text, choose a location. Using a task topic with steps like this gives us a much more semantic way to tag our content than if you were to do something like create a generic topic and then use an ordered list. The output would look the same. You would have a series of items 1, 2, 3. But if you use a task topic and you know that those items 1, 2, 3, etc. are steps, then that gives them a lot more semantic value. Next, let's talk about the reference topic type. So this is going to contain reference information, and it answers the question, what? A reference topic typically contains descriptive facts such as the syntax of a command or API function call, a table listing operational characteristics and tolerances of a device, or a table identifying items on a software screen. Reference topics don't include things like steps or background information. They are more similar to things like dictionary entries, and they provide facts only. So common elements in a reference topic include reference, which is again just the container element for the topic, title, and then ref body, which is the body element for a reference. And then within that ref body, you can have things like tables, you can have properties, which is just going to be a list of properties for what you're documenting. And you can also have this element called refsyn, which is for a syntax diagram. So now we're going to take a look at a reference example, and this just contains a single entry in a syntax diagram. So again, just like our other examples, over on the left, we've got the author-friendly view, and on the right, we've got our text view. And in this reference element, we've got the container, we've got the title, and we've got the ref body, similar to the structure of all of our other topic types. And within the ref body, we have this element called refsyn, and that contains a syn.ph element, which defines the syntax here for tnav. So now let's talk about the glossary entry topic type. Glossary entry defines a single term and answers the question, what does this mean? Glossary topics typically contain one term along with one or more definitions. So the common elements we find in glossary entry topics are gloss entry, which is the glossary entry topic type. And then within that, you've got gloss term, which is the word or phrase that you're defining, and gloss def, which is the definition of that glossary term. So this structure is a little bit different from the other topic types that we've seen, but it still has its own DITA structure. So here's an example of a glossary entry, so you can see this a little bit better how this works. So we've got the container element gloss entry, and instead of having the typical title and body that you see in the other topic types, you simply have a gloss term and a gloss def. So in this case, our gloss term is duck, and then we've got our definition with a paragraph inside it defining what a duck is. Now that we've covered topics, let's talk about DITA maps. So DITA topics can stand on their own and be published on their own, but content in one topic often has relationships to other topics. And a map describes the sequence and hierarchy of topics for a deliverable. So it's going to define those relationships between topics. Map files are how you organize content for delivery. So like I mentioned a little bit earlier, they're kind of analogous to a table of contents in a non-DITA structure. Maps create a sequence and hierarchy among your topics. And when you generate your output, so for example, a PDF file or a help system from your map, your reader will see the topics in the order and hierarchy that are established by that map file. You generally won't add all of your available topics to a map file, just the ones that you want included in a specific deliverable. And as I mentioned earlier with reuse, you can include the same topic in multiple different map files. And again, that's just one way that you can reuse content in DITA. So let's take a look at the elements you find in a map. And maps are mainly made up of the following elements: topic ref, which provides a link to a specific topic, and map ref, which provides a link to another map. So let's just take a look at how each of these work. Topic ref, in a map file, you use this element to provide a link to a specific topic. So you're going to put those topic refs in order to indicate sequence. So again, we've got another example here where you've got over on the left your sort of author-friendly view, and on the right you've got your text view of just a very basic map. And in this case, we've got two topic refs, so that's going to be references to two different topics. One of them is called wild duck species, and the other is called watching wild ducks. So the way this works is over here, when you look at the text view, you've got your map element. The map itself has a title, and then you've got two topic ref elements, one that goes to each of those topics. Now, if you want to do something like indicate hierarchy, then you can also nest topics or enclose a child topic ref inside of a parent topic ref. And you can have many, many more topic refs than this. We just had two to show a basic example. And then the other one is map ref. So in addition to linking to topics, you can link to other map files from within a map file. And in this approach, the subordinate maps or submaps that are referenced in your main map are usually a collection of related content. So let's take a look at an example of a map ref. Over here, instead of topic ref elements, you've got these map ref elements that reference other maps. So in this example, we've got a map called ducks, and it has references to two submaps, wild ducks and domestic ducks. When you use a map ref element, your table of contents for the main map will show each submap and the topics that it contains. So now that we've gone over topics and maps, I want to talk about another really important aspect of DITA, which is metadata. Metadata means beyond data or data about data. So if we want to kind of break this down and think about it in a non-DITA context, if you have been using something like a word processing application, that often has document properties, and that will tell you things like who created the file, what date it was last modified, etc. And this information, like author, modification date, in the document properties is not part of the text that's displayed and published. So that's an example of metadata. Those document properties are metadata about the document itself. In XML-based content, metadata lets you classify and manipulate your information. So in DITA, you can assign metadata at several different levels, including to topics, individual elements, and more. I want to go over a few different ways that content creators might use metadata in DITA, and this is definitely not an exhaustive list, but it's just a few examples. So these are some of the ways that your content creators can classify information using metadata. One is labeling information with a document type, such as white paper or proposal. Another is associating information with a specific product number. You can also indicate a user level, such as beginner, intermediate, or expert. You can indicate the audience for the content, so that might be something like manager or employee. You can provide status information for a topic, such as draft, review, or final. Or you can provide an expiration date for when the information is no longer valid. And again, as I mentioned, this is not an exhaustive list. You can also have all kinds of custom metadata, which is something that you can create via DITA specialization that allows your content creators to define and capture information on all other kinds of things for your content. Content creators aren't the only ones who use metadata. Your content consumers will use it as well. So after you've assigned metadata to your content, your readers might use it to do things like find information efficiently. It might also be used to support governance efforts, so controlling when information is made public or removed from a website. It can be used to personalize information. So for example, your reader might request only beginner information because that's what's relevant to them. It can also be used to filter information for different delivery variants. So for example, you might say, deliver this variant to Windows users and this other variant to Macintosh users. It can also allow you to reuse information efficiently. It can indicate the language used in the content. So if you're localizing content for different regions, that's one other piece of metadata that you can include. And it can also be used to manage project status. I want to talk about adding metadata to DITA content and how that's done. So in DITA and other XML formats, metadata is encoded inside of your topics, and that can be done at the topic level or at the map level or on specific elements. You can manipulate DITA content using those metadata values. DITA requires one piece of metadata, which is that every topic has to have an ID attribute. And these IDs are often assigned automatically by an authoring tool or content management system. So one example of a topic with an ID attribute, sorry, one second. Here we go. So here's an example, just looking at assigning a topic with an ID attribute. Up at the top, you've got topic, and then in bold here, we have ID equals domestic ducks. And other elements aside from the main topic container can also use this ID attribute. So for example, if you've got something like a table and you put an ID attribute on your table, that will allow you to do things like create a cross-reference to it. Your organization or your DITA setup may require additional metadata using other attributes. So for example, you might have, as I mentioned, for your language, you might have the XML lang attribute, which is commonly used to include metadata about the language the content's written in. Metadata can be contained using default or specialized DITA attributes, as I mentioned as well, when you can have something like custom metadata. And as a general rule, your readers are not going to see your metadata in the final output. They're just going to see things like the results of filtering or the use of metadata when they search your content. And I also want to just mention, when you're coming up with a content strategy, that should include a metadata strategy as part of it that takes into account things like how your content creators and how your content consumers are going to make use of your metadata. So as I just mentioned a minute ago, the one piece of metadata you're required to have is that ID attribute. And another thing that you can have is a prologue element on your topics, and that's a way that you can store metadata at the topic level for the entire topic. So here we've got an example of that. You see prologue contained here after the title in this topic, and this includes an author metadata element, and so I've just listed myself here as the author, and that's highlighted in bold. There are some other metadata elements that you can also have in the prologue that you might find useful. One of those is critical dates, and that's going to be contained in something called the crit dates element. So that can contain information such as the date that you created your content and the date that you revised it. You could also have copyright metadata information here, so that can be the copyright year and copyright holder for that particular piece of information. And you can also have information about product version, release, and modification stored here in the prologue. I do also want to point out the prologue metadata element is only used for system information such as author and critical dates. DITA does not use prologue metadata for filtering topics. So I want to look at an example now of some metadata at the element level. We just looked at it at the topic level, but this is at the specific element level. So for example, if you've got an element in your content that's only appropriate for a certain audience, then you can use an audience attribute on that one element to specify, what that particular audience is. So here we've got an example of that. We have a series of steps that would be in a task topic, and one of these steps we want to indicate that this is only appropriate for a novice audience. So what we can do is on that step, we can add this piece of metadata, again highlighted in bold, that says audience equals novice. And that allows you, when you generate your output for something like an expert level audience, then you can filter out this one step that's really only appropriate for novices. You can also use metadata in your DITA maps, and you can do that by specifying metadata on your Topicref elements that include those links to your topics. So this allows you to do things like suppress entire topics when you generate output if you're using it for filtering. By default, DITA gives you 3 attributes that support filtering or conditional processing on your maps, and that is audience, product, and platform. So in this example, this is kind of similar to what we did in the previous example on our one step element that was only appropriate for a novice audience, but what we've got here is a map where one of our topics in that map is appropriate only for a novice audience. So we've got here on this topic ref to domestic duck species.dita, we have this metadata audience attribute that says audience equals novice, so that whenever we generate our output, if we are, again, generating output intended for our expert audience, we can just filter this topic out of the map. If you need additional or different filtering attributes aside from those 3 audience, product, and platform that are provided out of the box in DITA, then that's where you're going to need to work with your information architect and specialize in order to define additional metadata that you might need for that kind of filtering. There are a few requirements that we've commonly seen, which are things like customer for customer specific information. You might want to specialize some metadata for region. So if you've got content that only applies to one specific geographic area, then you can filter based on that. You might also have something like a product or product family for information that applies to a specific product or group of products. So those are just a few things you can consider if you need specialized metadata. And now that we've kind of gone through a lot of the structure of DITA, I want to talk about something that's really important in the delivery of your DITA-based content, which is generating output. So most content delivery does not use the DITA source files. Instead, what you do is apply style sheets to those DITA files to create different output formats, such as HTML or PDF. And this process is called transformation. One way to transform your content from DITA into whatever output types that you need is using what's called the DITA Open Toolkit. So the DITA Open Toolkit is just a collection of style sheets, mostly written in extensible style sheet language or XSL. And those style sheets provide a starting point for creating output. So the default output that you get from an unmodified DITA Open Toolkit transformation tends to be unattractive, and it's obviously not going to be branded to fit your particular company. So a lot of times what happens is you'll start with those default transformations in the DITA Open Toolkit and enhance them and customize them before you can use them to create output in a production environment for your company. The DITA Open Toolkit is not the only way that you can generate output from DITA. You can use commercial tools to generate output. Some tools provide only publishing support, and others also provide authoring support. So it's just a few different options to look at when you're considering how you might want to publish your output from your DITA source content. A DITA transformation or transform is independent of your map files. So you can apply multiple transforms to a single map file. For example, if you have got a certain map file that you want to generate output from, you can run a PDF transform against it, and you can also run an online help system transform against it and get 2 different outputs from that same single map file. Earlier, we talked a little bit about how DITA content creation exists separately from formatting, and this is kind of getting into the details of what that means. So transformation is where you apply the formatting layer to get your final output. We also talked about how this aspect of DITA means that you can create one single source and generate multiple outputs from it. So the transformation process is how you accomplish this. So let's take a look at just this small example of what some output might look like. So on the left, we've got again the sort of author view that you might have in your XML editor. And then on the right, we've got what this might look like if we output this as HTML. So the transformation process here, if you look at the very bottom of this piece on the right, you see this little link at the bottom to a parent topic. And this is something that you would see that would be unique to HTML. So if you generated a PDF of this same content, you wouldn't get that because that's part of your your HTML setup is having those links established to different parts of your content. So when you've got your output, you might have different fonts, colors, spacing, whatever formatting that you need for each different output. And it can look different in your PDF versus your HTML versus your online help. You might have maybe the same set of colors, for example, or a common logo that represents your branding, but you may want to do something like different fonts that are more friendly for a screen versus for print. So that just shows how you can have different formatting for different output types. And that shows us one of the benefits of DITA we talked about earlier, which is multiple outputs from one single source. You only need to write the content one time and store it in one place, and then you can produce all of the different output that you need from that single source. And this is typically referred to as a single source of truth, and that's because that you know that when you've only written the content one time, you know that that's going to be the true source, and that no matter what kind of output you generate from it, if it's all coming from that same source, they're all going to be consistent with each other. So when you have flexible, semantically tagged, reusable content that exists separately from its formatting like you do in DITA, you have plenty of options and possibilities for how you can make your content really work for you. And with that, I would like to turn things over and open things up for questions.
We do have a few questions, and the first question is, can a task topic contain more than one task?
So one task topic will just contain a single task. If you need to have multiple tasks in a document, then what you would do is just have multiple task topics and then create a DITA map and create topic refs to each of those different task topics. And then that way you can group all of those tasks together. But as far as can you have more than one task or more than one procedure in a single topic, no, DITA is designed so that you just have, one task or one, set of steps, one kind of unit per file.
Got a few more questions on the task topic.
Okay.
Can you have explanatory text like body text within a task topic?
You can have explanatory text, but it's sort of done in a little bit of a different way than typical body text. So you are allowed to have on your steps, you can have additional information associated with each step. So after the command, that's where you're allowed to have your additional info, and that's where you can put things like supplemental paragraphs, notes, tables, images, whatever you need to kind of explain how that step works. And then you are also allowed to have things like examples that explain a little bit further how each step works. And again, this also is kind of a difference between the general task and the strict task. The strict task is a lot more, just restricted on where that extra information can go. And again, another way that you can sort of combine some more of that explanatory information with procedural information is you might be better off having something like a concept topic that says, here's all of the sort of explanation that you need, and then a task topic that has just the steps, and you may group those together in a map. It really just depends on how your content is set up, but there are, different options so that you can be flexible in how you present whatever kind of supplemental information that you might need with your tasks. And I will also just add here as well, We have a course on the Learning DITA site that has a lot more detail about task topics. So it walks you through step by step how you actually can build those task topics, where you can include some of that extra or supplemental information so that it will still be valid within that task topic.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about defining elements before a project. Do you define elements before beginning the project itself? For example, if you're going to use a warning, caution, note, or tip, how do you handle that in regard to like setting up a new element if you need it?
So this is just kind of where when you are working on your information architecture and you're planning out the structure, that's one of the considerations that you would have. So if you're going to specifically be thinking about, admonitions like that, then you would look at the particular, things that are offered in DITA by default. So for that, the note element has a type attribute where you can define it as, type equals warning, caution, etc. And then if you notice that there's a type like that that isn't defined by default in DITA, that's where you might go, I need to specialize. And that applies not just to admonitions, but to really anything within the structure. If you are, planning out your architecture and you kind of say, I need an element that does this, or I need an attribute that does this, and you look through the DITA specification and you don't see that anywhere, then that's where you start considering specialization and say, what are my needs for this? How badly do I need it? Is it going to be worth the additional cost to specialize that element or attribute?
You showed people the ID for topics and how they can be used to create cross references. What if someone wants to reference just a part inside of a document? How do you handle that?
You can have an ID on elements as well, other than just the container for an entire topic. So for example, if you've got like a note or a table or something and you want to create a cross-reference to it, then you would just put that ID attribute on that element individually. Again, it has to be a unique ID, and this can be something that you either create by hand or that whatever tool you're using can automatically generate it and ensure that it's a unique ID. But what that does is you would have something like, let's say you're going to cross-reference a note. You would have note ID equals and then whatever the unique ID is. And then when you are cross-referencing it elsewhere, it can use that ID to set up your cross-reference so that it picks up just that one specific note. And that gets into the idea of content reference or conref, which is also covered in more detail in our Learning DITA reuse courses. There's a part 1 and a part 2, and I believe conrefs are covered in part 1.
Could you speak briefly about creating a cover page through your DITA map?
Cover page is going to be on the output side. So what you would need to do there is if you were, I'm assuming this is for something like PDF, something print-based, when you are transforming your output, so you're coming up with your PDF transform, whether you're doing that in-house or having someone kind of design or extend that for you, then you would let them know, okay, I need a cover page here. And then that would be part of that PDF transform. It wouldn't be stored on the DITA side since it's just formatting specific. But if you have requested that to be part of your PDF transform, then you would generate your output from that map, and then there would be a cover page before your table of contents and then all of the other content contained inside.
Here's a question that's a little bigger in scope. Do we
Okay.
always need a content management system to adopt DITA?
You do not. This is just something to consider though when you're coming up with your content strategy. You can just use DITA with a file system. There are a lot of cautions and things to consider with that. We've seen some companies do it both as just a stopgap and also kind of as a more long-term solution. But no, you're not required to have a content management system for your DITA content. It can still just work in a file system. But one thing I do want to caution on strongly with that is version control. When you're in something like a CCMS, which is a component content management system designed specifically for things like DITA or XML-based content, it has a lot of controls built in, so that you know, things like versioning, like making sure there are not conflicts between authors, that's all handled by the system. Whereas if you are not working in a CCMS and you're just working on your file system, it's going to be really, really important that you establish some other type of version control so that you don't have those kind of conflicts. And that's where it can get a lot trickier, because a lot of times that version control ends up just relying on a lot of really good internal communication. This is kind of just, as you said, Alan, it's a big scope question, because this is just something to think about with your content strategy. You know, you would consider things like your overall amount of content. If you've got, you know, hundreds of thousands of topics, then you probably don't want to deal with the headache of managing that yourself on a file system, because there's just lots of organization and version control involved in that. If you've got a smaller set, it might be manageable on a file system more so than a larger content set would be. It's just really important to think about, you know, how long, if you're not going to use a CCMS right away, how long would you stay in a file system? What are your publishing needs? Because again, if you're not in a CCMS, then you're going to be generating output, you know, kind of on your own in-house. And if you're in a CCMS, then you can hook in whatever publishing tool, whether it's a DITA OT transformation or something else. That can all be managed and even automated by your CCMS. So those are just the kind of things to think about. You know, how are we publishing our content? How are we using it? What is involved in authoring it? How much content do we have? Who are we delivering it to? Does our audience require any sort of personalization? And then how difficult is that going to be to manage with or without a CCMS? Then of course, there's the whole idea of cost to think about as well. So lots of considerations, but just to answer the basic question, yes, it is possible to use DITA without a CCMS. It just may not be ideal for your situation.
And I would add to that, you can do a file system, you can use a component content management system, you can even use a code repository like Git or Subversion as a middle step if need be. There are lots of options, and they really depend on all the things that Gretyl outlined. Here's another kind of big picture question. How does one get started with implementing the DITA structure?
Well, I think the very first step, once you've already chosen DITA, is think about your information architecture and your taxonomy, and plan, you know, whether you're going to need specialization or not, how your topics are going to be set up, that sort of thing. If you are already creating content in a you know, non-DITA environment, if that's something very unstructured and you are looking at converting that to DITA, that's another thing you have to consider is, you know, once you've come up with sort of an information architecture and a content model, how difficult and time consuming is it going to be to get your content converted from its current state into DITA? And is that going to look like, you know, maybe hiring a conversion vendor to take that content as it is and just apply DITA tags to it? Or does it look more like rewriting your content from scratch if it was done in a way that has nothing resembling topics? So that's sort of the first step that you would take, really, is just information architecture, content modeling, and then figuring out how you're going to get your current content over into DITA.
To tie on to that, there are a few questions about conversion and how you do it. And Gretel's already touched on that. To figure out the cost, it depends deeply on the content you have, how well, for example, it follows a template. If you have a fairly rigid template and you used it correctly across your sets of files, in general, it's going to be a little less expensive to convert that content. If you're kind of freeform with your templates, it's going to be a little more expensive. And as Gretel mentioned, sometimes it may be better to start over. So rewriting may be better than doing conversions. So that also should play into your idea on costs on that.
Yes, and
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Gretel, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, we've actually seen some cases where, some clients we've worked with have said, we know DITA is not a consideration in the short term, but we already are taking a look at our content and rewriting it so that it's more topic-based and more modular, even if it's still in something like Word or InDesign or what have you, just so that if we ever want to go to something more structured like DITA one day, the content will be better suited to that. So that's another thing to consider as well.
We have one question about lightweight DITA, but I won't make you answer it.
Okay.
To the attendee that asked about that, we have an entire session on that. Please check the schedule and you'll probably learn more than you want to know about lightweight DITA later during Learning DITA Live. We have time for one last question, and I'm going to, let me see, we've got a few. And for those, if we don't answer your question or you have more questions, please send them to experts@learningdita.com. We are going to have a question and answer session at the very end of the very last session of the event on Thursday. So please send your questions to experts@learningdita.com and we will compile them and hopefully give you some answers then. And we'll drop that email address along with the link to the session evaluation form in the questions pane. So look for that if you would. And the last question is, what is the difference between DocBook and DITA, and what are the advantages between the two? I know you cannot answer that in 2 minutes, but give it your best shot.
So DocBook and DITA are basically different XML standards for structured authoring. As far as advantages and disadvantages, that really is going to be a lot more specific to your organization and your needs. So I'm going to just have to give the standard consultant answer there and say it depends. But really, whether DocBook or DITA is a better fit just is going to depend on your particular content and your content needs and your publishing needs.
And with that, Gretel, I will thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we are going to start with the next session, which is DITA Right for Me by John Baker.